Hey there, magical experimenters. Taylor Ellwood here, and yep, here I am doing another video this weekend. Well, it's Father's Day, and that's kind of the reason because I've been doing a lot of thinking about sacred masculinity and what it means to be a male in this day and age. And yes, as someone who is a what is it? I guess cisgendered male, as in this is the way I've been all along, and all that other stuff, you know, and I'm heterosexual and all that other stuff, right? That's all gonna factor in to some of this exploration. But I'm only speaking of my experience. I'm not speaking for anyone else's experience here, and I want to be very clear about that up front because what I'm sharing is really just my own thoughts and ponderings and meanderings around this topic because I've been doing a lot of work lately, really really the last couple of years around this topic, and it started about a year and a half ago. My dad died in the beginning of 2019, January 2nd, and I I have a very conflicted relationship with my dad, even though he's passed on, but I do. On the one hand, I miss him every day, and I think about him every day. I wonder right now, like, what would he say about this pandemic, or what advice would he give me about the things that I'm doing, and things like that. And on the other hand, my dad and I never really knew my dad. He was a cipher. He was, I don't think he even really knew himself, but like who he was would switch depending on the people that he was around. What stood out to me was that these people, family friends of his that knew him, when we went out to the funeral, which didn't happen for like a half a year because of complications and things like that. There was all kinds of weird stuff. But when we finally went and did the funeral, he oh yeah, this was a year and a half ago. So it's like, thank you for the thoughts, Janice. I appreciate it. He like like these people were surprised about some of the stories we told about him because my dad could be with them was a very polite gentleman, etc. But with us, I mean, he would tell crude jokes like you wouldn't believe. I mean, this was a person who just had no problem, had no filter around his kids. Um, and growing up with him was not an easy experience either. My dad was could be a very hard person in some ways to be around. I remember him being ticked off, and it was kind of ironic because I learned about this year. I learned about this many years later that he was in chorus himself, but he was ticked off that I was doing chorus. He's like, "Why are we wasting our time on this when you should be doing sports or something like that?" And I mean, that was just kind of the light edge. I mean, as I was growing up, he would tell me what a disappointment I was. There were occasional physical activities that happened, which were not necessarily fun to go through. Um, so my dad and I had a complicated relationship, and I guess have a complicated relationship. Yes, he's passed on, but obviously he's still in my thoughts, and he's still part of my experience. And so I've been doing a lot of internal work around, working with my boy, that younger version of myself, and helping him heal. And that's been helped along by my very wonderful and amazing partner who has just known how to speak to that part of myself. And we've talked and worked through that, and a lot. And then I've been doing a lot of work lately around my relationship with my penis, and really coming at that from a place of really just relearning that relationship. Because one of the things that I've been working through and realizing with this work is how much that relationship has been a relationship of pressure pressure to perform, pressure to be a certain way, to be sexual, etc. The movie that kind of comes to mind is Fight Club. And at one point in Fight Club, they're talking about, how the role model for being a male is your father. And the guy talks about how, like his father like moved around the country and got into different relationships, and the one guy says, the fucker was setting up franchises. And I'm like, that's my dad. And it really was. I mean, my dad got married 4 different times, cheated on each of his wives, had, multiple kids, and he just and really, I mean, part of my struggle in regards to him is how how do I navigate that relationship, even though he's gone now? How do I navigate this relationship with this person who, on the one hand, is somebody that I still love, that I still have fond memories of, and that at the same time, I have these memories of things that were not so wonderful with him. The second to last time that I saw my dad, I I ended up having a conversation with him about his family and asking. I asked him lots of questions, and I think it was the closest experience I had to ever really getting to know him, because I was asking him questions about his sister, and I was asking him questions about his parents, and really about him. And I purposely did this because I wanted to learn more about this person who has shaped my life in so many dynamic ways, and who, even gone, even now, has still shaped my life in so many ways. And yes, I'm all about internal work and doing stuff, but when you're doing internal work, you have to recognize the influences that shaped you. And my dad has profoundly shaped me in certain ways. And it's why I'm navigating and rediscovering this relationship with myself as a man, and trying to figure out, like, who am I as a man? What does that even mean? And in the case of my dad, one of the things that really stood out to me is he showed me, he talked a lot about, his parents and stuff, and who they were, and how they showed up in his life. And I realized, here are these people that I didn't even meet very often. I met them maybe like 3 4 times in my life, and yet these people had a profound effect on my life, because they shaped my dad. They shaped him into the person that he was. And I don't think he ever really, I don't think he challenged that shape in a way that was good for him. I don't think he did the kind of internal work that I've done. I mean, he just, I don't know that he knew how. Um, I wonder what would have been different if he had, but I can't change that, and he's dead and gone, and he can't change that. But here's something interesting that came up when I went to the funeral. My brother and I and my eldest half sister were looking through a bunch of clippings and things that my dad still had from my grandparents. And what was really bizarre was that my grandma had collected a bunch of clippings of things, and like circled or underlined every single time the family name showed up in the newspaper. All the recognitions, like if my dad had performed in a play, if my dad had done well at this sport events, if my dad had sung at chorus, or things like that, all of it was underlined in everything else. And it was profoundly disturbing in a way to just see how much focus was put on the family name and how often it showed up, and the recognition that occurred. And it helped me come to a different place around an internal issue that I have grappled with a lot, which is the internal issue around recognition and being recognized. Because I've had this issue come up a lot in my work, and it's something that when I saw these newspaper clippings and I read all of these little things, and I saw how much my grandmother and grandfather had put so much emphasis on recognition, it also helped me see my dad in a different way, because I suddenly saw how much he had been a product of that shaping around having to be recognized, and why it had made him such a, just like a type A personality in a lot of ways, which is kind of ironic because if you had ever met my dad, and a few people who have met my dad would say, you know, he seemed in some ways pretty easygoing, and he was. I mean, he had a real temper on him. I have his temper actually, and like when he would get angry, it would be like a blowing up of a volcano. That's another area that I've done a ton of internal work around and still am, because again, that's, you know, some of that's tied into my masculinity and some of it's just tied into the emotion of anger, and being able to separate those two out and being able to say, okay, this is really tied into the experience of being a male versus this is tied into the experience of being angry, and you know, how do I navigate those both has been really crucial for me coming to a better place around my emotions. And yes, folks, there's going to be some interesting books on these topics, I might add, down the line, because I'm definitely working on it. It's fermenting, everything else. It's just this isn't the right time for it. But I'm sharing this video today because I want to share, like, well, this is where I'm at with my journey. And getting back to the recognition bit, with when I realized this about my dad, I started looking at myself and like, well, this is what contributed to the great fall of 2017. And by that I mean like when my businesses crashed and burned and everything else, because I was doing that. I was doing everything from a place of ego, and really, and my ego, pride goeth before the fall. Boom, that's what happened. And in the work that I'm doing now, I mean, one of the most crucial things that I've really reminded myself of is like, look, this work has to come from the right place. It has to be about community. I mean, certainly it has to be about myself to some degree. Like, you know, I'm trying to make a living writing books and selling classes and stuff like that. I'm not going to lie and say otherwise. It's what I'm doing. So let's just put that out there on the table. But still, the work is ultimately also has to be about the community. It has to be about serving the community, and it has to be about recognizing when ego gets in the way, because sometimes ego does get in the way. You know, today and this was really nice, and this has been happening a bit more lately, and it's really touched on a part of myself that has needed this, but I'm also tempering that need very carefully. But today I got this nice long Facebook message from one of my readers, and she talked about how she'd been reading my book, The Process of Magic, and how it really helped her recognize certain things within herself that she was exploring. Well, that's awesome. Now the ego side of me could be like, "Ooh la la, I'm so awesome," and stroke the ego and all that other stuff, and but I'm like, no, it's really not about me. I mean, great, my book helped her out. That's awesome. It's really what should really be recognized is the fact that she's doing this work, and that yes, I played a small part in it. I've helped inspire her in doing this work, and that's awesome. But what's got to be recognized here is the fact that she's doing this work. And the same goes out to the rest of you who have, in one form or another, expressed your appreciation for my work and how it's helping you with your lives. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Really, I do. It is nice to be appreciated and recognized. It has not happened a lot, and it's kind of nice that of late it just like y'all are coming out of the woodwork or something, and I'm just so amazed and honored and honestly humbled by it. My dad, to bring this back to the context here, my dad was always about recognition. Like, he wanted me to get straight A's. He wanted me to do this, do that. And I think that has driven a lot of the unhealthy relationship that I've had with recognition. Because, here my dad is, saying you gotta push ahead, you gotta be masculine and strong and everything else, and you gotta show up, you gotta be the warrior, whatever else. He didn't really say that, but that's kind of the gist of it, if you will. And now it's kind of like, well, no, I'm going to change this relationship with recognition around. Yes, I'll acknowledge the fact that I've gotten some recognition and appreciation, and that's awesome, and thank you and everything else, but I'm going to shift it around and refocus it toward And what's really important is that this stuff is helping you guys and that you're getting further ahead. And I'm honored to have played a role. But go you for doing the work. Go you for reading that book and then taking some of those things and applying it to your practice and having the realizations, because you're doing the work. And that really is so crucial, because how many people honestly do the work? And so, and so, when I look at recognition now, I'm looking at it from a place of, great, how can I gracefully acknowledge this and at the same time not let my ego, puff up and be all manly and everything else or whatever and get in the way, and instead acknowledge it and then continue to shift it around toward this mutual appreciation, this mutual recognition, because so often that's what we don't have. And I'm not saying this whole recognition thing is solely a man thing here, right? But I'm just talking about this in relationship to my experience with recognition and why my dysfunctional relationship with recognition has come out of my relationship with my dad, and even how I've seen that modeled as a man through my dad's experiences and the stories that I've heard about him. It's one of those things where I think it's crucial to make that distinction. And it's interesting, because if I look at this from the lens of my mom and relationship to recognition, it's a totally different story. With my mom, it boils down to the struggles to be recognized, the struggle, to have her artwork acknowledged and things like that. And that in and of itself intimately fits into my experience with recognition as well. So it's not just me focusing on that, because when I'm navigating this relationship with my thing around recognition, I am looking at the story that my mom has played in this too. But the reason I'm focusing on this today in regards to good old dad is because, my dad shaped my life in such profound ways that if I don't acknowledge that and recognize it right now in this moment of Father's Day, which I have such a conflicted feeling about in and of itself, well, I could do the same thing with mom. Really, I can, and I am. But this is just this whole thing around the masculinity thing. Lately, it's been focused around dad, and a large part of it is because I can't have these conversations with him anymore. I don't know if I ever could have had these conversations with him. Not in the not in the flesh anyway. And I could do a thing and try and have a conversation with him as an ancestor or whatever else, and there is some value in doing that. But I think going through my ancestral families, the stuff in my family, and the newspaper clippings and all that other stuff was a conversation with them, and it was like, wow, this is where I'm getting this from. Once I had that change, and this happened like last May, so a little over a year ago, it really it helped me continue to just change my relationship around the whole recognition thing. And it was helped along by reading a book called The Courage to Be Disliked, which I highly recommend to any of you, because it's really a book that explores this narrative of competition and like why people get fixated on trying to be like each other or other things, because we do, I certainly do. I've certainly at times found myself comparing myself to other occult authors or whatever, and getting stuck on the fact that, okay, this person is much more successful than I am, whatever that means. And it's like I'm not playing that game anymore. I don't want to play that game anymore. It doesn't help me in any way. It certainly doesn't help my community. And it takes away from the work and the purity of the work. And when I'm doing the work, whether it's writing or magic or whatever else, I want it to be focused on the essential, on the pure, on what really needs to be mediated and shared in the world. So that's kind of my Father's Day video here. I know I've done a lot of videos lately. We'll probably go back down to the normal amount, but I just really wanted to share this today because this is something that I'm navigating and figuring out, and it's important work. It's good work, but it's hard work, all the same. Um, but I think that as I continue to renegotiate my relationship with my dad and with my own sense of masculinity and what makes a man in relationship to myself and my loved ones and everything else, this is the kind of stuff we need to do. And it's interesting. I'm 43 years old. And I will tell you that, a lot of people have this notion that, you're supposed to have your life figured out by a certain point, but I don't agree with that at all. I think we're always figuring out our lives. We're always doing this work. And when you recognize that, then you don't try so hard to figure it out early on because you just let it relax and let it go. When I look at my dad, in a lot of ways, he did have his life figured out. I mean, if you were to look on the surface, he had good career. He had, he was able to do what he wanted when he wanted for the most part. He had dysfunctional relationships with the women in his life and with his kids, and that's where he really wasn't successful, so to speak. But he had a lot of his act together in certain ways. But then again, he really didn't, because again, I don't think he really knew himself, or if he did, he certainly wasn't sharing with anyone. I didn't know him. I mean, I saw little pieces, but a lot of times I just got this image, and it's one of the reasons why I tend to call out the whole image thing that I see like in the occult community too, because I just like it. Like when people put on a show, it's like just stop putting on a show. Just be yourself, please, warts and all. Just be who you are. Be vulnerable. Be courageous enough to just be yourself for whatever in whatever way you need to be. You don't have to put on a show, because people can tell. And if you're plastic, well, people can tell that too. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate the comments from Janice and Elise. I hope I said your name right, Elise. And I hope you all have a wonderful and happy day.